everyone, I hope you're all doing really well and welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to this Bumblebee tutorial. I feel like it's been ages since I recorded part one, so thank you so much for being so patient for the next few parts. I feel like most of June I've been just here, there and everywhere, travelling around, been on a couple of holidays, just taking a bit of a break. But yeah, I'm fully back into it now, so I hope you enjoy part two. Part two, we're going to be focusing on the wings, which are a completely different texture to what we've drawn so far. The body is quite vibrant, it's very fuzzy in terms of that texture, whereas the wings are almost transparent, very sort of glossy. They seem to be reflecting the light a little bit as well. So I think I'm going to start with the Warm Grey 1 Polychromo, which is quite a pale neutral colour. And if you look at the wing quite closely, because it is transparent and almost see-through, we can see a lot of that kind of green background through the wing. And because I'm not going to be doing a big, green background on this particular piece, I'm not going to add much green to the wing. I'm going to try and keep the green to a minimal and stick to the kind of neutral tones and the other colours that we can see in the wing. So with this Warm Grey 1, you want to start by just going along sort of the outline and all of these sort of other little lines that kind of join together and make up all these shapes that are kind of going on within the wing. We've got a lot of different formations going on. I'm using this with a sort of medium pressure. I've never actually drawn an insect before, like properly, using coloured pencils, so this is a bit of a challenge for me as well. Completely different texture to what I'm used to drawing, this wing. So once you're happy with the placement of all of these shapes and formations that make up the wing, you can then kind of go over some of those main lines with a slightly harder pressure to kind of define them a little bit more. But at the same time, you want to make sure those wings still look quite delicate. So, don't be doing really harsh lines. And then I think I might just lightly, using the side of my pencil, just kind of fill in the wing as well, just to cover that kind of white paper that we can still see in and amongst the wing, because it is quite a lot darker than the white paper. We do have some parts, especially this top wing, where it's almost like reflecting the light. There's a lot of really bright white sections, so maybe leave them as they are. Try and shade around those areas to keep them bright white. And everywhere else, just add like a bit of a light layer with your Warm Grey 1. And then you want to focus on this other wing at the bottom. So again, start by outlining sort of like the outer edge. I'm almost using the flat side of my pencil as well, still using it on its side to get that flatter surface to sort of shade with or outline with. Give you a bit of a softer line rather than using the pointy edge. And then because it's transparent, we can see those like little stripes from the body underneath. So I'm gonna lightly shade where that is, where we can actually see that yellow stripe through the wing on the edge of the body over here. And then, just like we did with the top wing, you just want to fill in all of the wing basically with a light pressure. Even over the section that's yellow. And then with the pointier side of your pencil, you just want to start going over some of these lines and formations that make up the wing that you can see. I'm also going to include some cooler tones because at the minute it's just looking very sort of warm toned. So I'm going to go in with the Silver Grey Luminance pencil, which actually has a slight blue tint to it. And using this quite lightly, you just want to shade in areas of the wing that have that sort of cooler grey tint to it. So that cooler colour is definitely sort of over where those dark areas of the body are. Kind of, you know, because we can see those dark areas through the wing as they're very transparent. Those areas do look more cooler toned. And then I'm not really going to add anywhere, you know, we can see that yellowy stripe through the wing. I'll leave that as it is. Like that. On top of those areas, I'm going to go in with the Cold Grey 2, which is slightly darker, but still very much a cool tone. And you can also start to go over some of these main lines and sort of patterned formations that make up the wing. next up I'm going to go in with the Raw Umber 50%, which again is quite a neutral colour, but it does have a slight greeny tint to it. So for where we can see those little bits of green from the background through the wings, this is going to provide us with that subtle green colour, but without being too overpowering, because we're not really drawing in the rest of the background around it. So yeah, just add a little bit of this to the wing, use it to kind of shade in areas or to go along some of these shapes and formations that make up the wing. So we're just kind of building up our colour and tonal value gradually, but applying everything in a very sort of delicate, controlled way. It feels really good to be back drawing. I feel like for a creative person, and probably a lot of you feel like this as well, that when you go on holiday, you know, the first half of it is great, but then you're kind of itching to get back into drawing again. I kind of had 2 holidays, but with a bit of work in between. So I went to Greece for a week, and I actually uploaded my Crete vlog quite a few weeks ago now. I went there at like the start of June, and then I had a few weeks back just to kind of get everything scheduled and set up ready for when I went away again, which was more towards the end of June. And I went on a cruise, my first ever cruise, with my 2 best friends around the Mediterranean. So we started off in Barcelona, and then we went to the south of France. We went round Marseille and Cannes, and then we went to Palma, Ibiza, and then back to Barcelona. So it was a nice little trip really, but it just went really quick. So I feel like I need another holiday now, but obviously I can't. I need to get back into work again for a bit first. But yeah, it was really nice. That was the Virgin Voyager cruise, and I honestly couldn't recommend it enough. The whole service, the food, every single room on the cruise was just unreal. And for my first ever cruise, I'm, you know, very, very impressed. It's quite nice to kind of be one place one day and then you wake up and you're in a completely different place. So yeah, would definitely recommend. And I was worried that I was going to get seasick because I've never been on a cruise before, but we only felt it, I think, maybe twice. And some of the days it was a little bit rough due to the weather, but you couldn't really feel it. It was only like slightly. But the ship is that big that, you know, you can't really feel it. And I didn't need my seasickness tablets, even though I took loads. So yeah, that's a positive. It was just dead nice. We had a little balcony as well, so we could look out to sea. It had a little hammock. Honestly, just unreal. I really want to do it all over again. My dad gets quite seasick. My mum wants to go on a Norwegian cruise around like the Norwegian fjords, which looks dead nice, but you've got to cross the North Sea where it docks from. You've got to cross the North Sea to get there, and that's supposed to be quite rough. So I don't know how I'd get on with that. My dad would definitely, he wouldn't stand a chance. He gets really seasick. But yeah, it doesn't affect my mum at all. It's weird, isn't it, how it affects different people? How some people get really seasick and then others it doesn't affect them at all. So just be conscious that you don't want to add like a really thick defined line around the outer edge. I've kept the line around the outer edge quite faint. We want to see that line so we can see the difference between, you know, where it starts and where it ends in terms of, you know, the page and the wing. But you know, you don't want it to be too defined, because at the end of the day it's very transparent, it's very delicate, so we want to sort of replicate that with our pencil strokes. So I'm going to leave that there with the raw umber 50%. That's just added a really nice, subtle, like earthy green tint to the wing, well, to both wings. And again, I've sort of left out that golden yellowy part. Over those darkest lines within the wing, I'm going to go in with the Slate Grey, which is quite a dark, almost blue tinted grey, and use the pointy side of my pencil just to define those main lines and shapes within the wing. Keeping my pressure quite light with this one. I'm going to just add a tiny little bit of the raw umber just to the top of this wing. I feel like some of the colours from the Bumblebee are almost like reflecting back into the wing. So just add a few little golden tints to areas of the wing. And especially this part here, where we can see the body through the wing. Also into this section here, I'm going to add a little bit of the Raw Sienna Luminance pencil, which is a bit more golden and a bit more vibrant. Using the French Grey Luminance pencil, just also going to use this over some of those main sort of shapes within the wing. Again, just keep adding to that sort of definition. And this is slightly warmer in tone in comparison with that slate grey. I'm then going to use a mixture of the Cold Grey 1 and the Cold Grey 2. They're very similar, but one's just slightly darker. Just to start to remove some of this grainy texture that the pigment has picked up. So basically, when you're working on quite a toothy paper like Fabriano paper like this one, although it's still very smooth, because it's got a lot of tooth being a watercolour paper, it does allow you to add a lot of layers, but that means that initially it does pick up quite a lot of that grainy texture. So unless you're really squashing down the tooth and pushing that pigment into those tiny grooves, it does pick up a lot of that texture. The wings actually have quite a lot of colours in them, and they're quite a lot darker than I initially thought. I think every bumblebee that I end up drawing on this piece will be very, very different in terms of the wings and how I'm going to approach them as well. Because it all depends on the lighting and the position of the bumblebee and how much of the wings we can see. Because some of the other ones are quite close together and they look quite dark. Whereas this one is very much being hit by the light, but it's still quite a lot darker than I initially thought. So you'll probably need to use like a medium to hard pressure in some areas to really kind of smudge that pigment together and, you know, completely squash down the tooth of the paper, removing that grainy texture. So I'm just going to go in with the Cold Grey 1, which is slightly lighter, and use this for those slightly lighter parts of the wing. I think it's always better to go slightly darker than not adding enough, because we can always remove that pigment. We've got, you know, a few different materials that we can use to do that. But if you don't add enough initially, then it can end up looking quite flat. And that comes down to everything really with coloured pencils. Always, you know, just kind of go for it. Add a little bit more than you initially think. And what you draw will tend to look a lot kind of fuller. Next up, I'm going to go in with the white. So this is the Caran d'Ache Museum Aquarelle pencil. This is my favourite ever white pencil because it's so pigmented and it's activated with water. So for some of these like little specks of highlight where the light is really sort of reflecting off those wings, we can actually activate it with water by dipping the tip into a little bit of water, dabbing off the excess and almost like dotting in the areas that we want to be really bright. And I'll show you what amazing effect it makes. I think we might have done it for here actually. It's been quite a while since I've filmed part 1, so I might have done it in part 1, but I'll show you again anyway if not. So I'm just going to firstly use it in the lightest parts of the wing, quite lightly. And this is also a good one for really smoothing out that pigment and blending it together because it's such a waxy pencil. So if you're just wanting to brighten areas up, then this is a good pencil to use. Although, you know, if you use quite a lot of white, sometimes it does desaturate those colours underneath. But because we're working with quite neutral, almost transparent like colours anyway, we're trying to get that transparent see-through effect. I think it might actually work quite well if we use a fair bit of this colour. I'm going to use it over this golden yellowy part, and it is really going to desaturate those colours, but then I'm going to reapply them. I'm just going to use this mainly just to smooth out that grainy texture so it's completely smooth. So I'm going to go back in with the raw sienna for a minute and just reapply that golden colour to this part of the wing with a slightly harder pressure this time. There's not like a defined edge either where this yellowy part finishes and the darker part begins. So try and kind of smudge them together and blur that line as they kind of transition from one section to the other. Obviously there's a defined line where it starts and ends on the actual body, but because we've got this wing over the top, it almost blurs it slightly. And then I might just go in briefly also with the cadmium yellow polychromo. This is actually a watercolour pencil, but if you've got the polychromo, then you can use that one. This is slightly more vibrant. And a little bit at the base of the wing there as well. Before I go back in with the white Caran d'Ache Museum Aquarelle pencil and show you how I activate it with water to create some really bright highlights, I'm just going to go in with a really sharp dark sepia polychromo and just use this to define all the shapes and formations that make up the wing. Whilst we were blending our colours together, some of those lines might have smudged, so we just want to make sure those main ones are sort of really defined without being too dark. There's some like really fine lines going over this golden section. So now that those shapes within the wing are looking a little bit more defined and we've got those slightly darker areas and it's looking quite blended as well, we're now at the stage where we want to pull out those highlights. So back in with your white museum aquarelle pencil, if you've got a little bit of water handy, then just dip the tip of your pencil in the water and just kind of dab off the excess, and you can see how pigmented that is already on the back of my hand. So just kind of dotting in where those brightest white areas are within the wing, you can create some lovely effects. You might need to do it a few times. I think sometimes when you are working on something like this that's quite pale anyway, and you want some areas to really stand out, I think this actually works better sometimes than the craft knife slice tool. The slice tool always works best when you've built up loads and loads of layers, and obviously it shows up better when you're working with darker colours. So for little bits of detail like this, I think the white museum aquarelle pencil activated with water does work quite well. So I'm quite happy with how that's looking. If you wanted to actually define some of those highlights, you could go in with a slightly lighter colour. So if I just pick out, say, the warm grey 3, it's obviously a lot lighter than the dark sepia that we've just been using, but you can use this to almost just shade around some of these highlights so they kind of stand out even more. You don't really want to do it to all of them because it might look slightly odd, but just to those main ones that you really want to stand out. Then it should work quite well. If you've got a white Uniball Posca pen, that would also work quite well. Gives you the same kind of effect, but that's more like a paint pen. So it doesn't need to be activated with water. But I think with the pencil, you've just got a slightly bit more control. I'm going to add a tiny bit of the shade Sanguine, which is more like an orangey colour. Like a dimmed orangey colour, I'd say. I can just see a slight tint of this colour amongst this wing as it sort of goes into this yellowy section. So I'm just going to add a bit of a tint to the wing, probably nothing more than that. And then I'm just going to use the black, making sure it's really quite sharp, to fill in this section in between the wings. And actually I think I might go in with the ivory black Derwent pencil first before the Polychromo, just because it's so much more pigmented. It's really dark. Like, you can see the difference already. And this is probably one of the darkest sections of the Bumblebee, so I want to make sure it is really dark, so we've got that depth where we can. So just fill in that section, almost flick into the section that we've already drawn to keep that sort of fuzzy, fluffy texture. And then you want to go in with your black Polychromo just to kind of squash that into the paper. So squash down the tooth, press down a little bit harder. And flick into what we've done so far, leaving little gaps in between. Just gives the illusion that that part of the head or body is sort of falling in front of this dark section. And then you could use it just to go over any of these other little lines within the wing. But to be honest, I think we're pretty much there with it. So I think I might leave that there for part 2 and just, you know, keep it solely focused on those wings, because we've included a lot of different colours there. And yeah, I think I'm going to leave that there for part 2 and then focus on the rest of the body for part 3. So I hope you enjoyed part 2, and as usual I've left the line drawing, the reference photo and the full materials list in the video description below. And all the colours have been listed throughout the whole tutorial as well at the lower left hand side, somewhere over here. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll be back very soon with part 3. If you've got any questions at all, then just comment below and I'll get back to you when I can. And keep tagging me in all of your posts on social media and showing me all your works in progress, because I really love to see all of your work that you do from my tutorials. So thanks for watching, and I'll be back very soon.